You get called by the president and he says, come to the State House right now. And you're in the middle of the city during lunch. You don't have the faintest idea. Why is he calling me for what? You don't have a brief. And that happened to me a couple of times. I was never afraid. I never shivered and say, oh no, no, I was there. And we would sit the same desk. I sit on the other side, I'm sitting here, and my minister is over there, and another minister who has brought an issue is sitting. I wasn't hesitant or fearful or anything. No, I would just say, thank you, Excellency. The situation is like this and this and this. Even to the point of even arguing, at some point the president told me, well, you guys just pay some of these unexpected expenditures, and so why are you refusing to give this ministry? I said, such as what, Your Excellency? And I said, oh, there's a law, Your Excellency, we're allowed by the law. Constitutional and statutory appropriation allows us to do that. I was appointed acting Accountant General very early. One of the guys who came, I was 31 years old, and he came and said, you are the Accountant General? So young? What's so important about you? Are you a genius or something? And this is head of department, and this is the head of the accounting service in the entire country. And we were engaged now with the World Bank, the IMF, the donors, the Japanese, and what have you.
Meaningful careers now. Take the time to take your destiny in your hands now. With meaningful careers.
Welcome to our channel, Mr. Gutu. We are so excited to have you at Meaningful Careers. You are a very much experienced man who has worked across multiple continents, multiple organizations. So I'm so thrilled to get the wisdom and the insights from somebody who has done it all. So I know you have worked in Zimbabwe, South Africa, you worked at the UN, and now you are in the USA as well. But I'm curious, to understand your journey. I don't want to kind of do the introduction to the audience, but I would really want you to kind of walk us through your journey in your own words.
I really appreciate this time and this opportunity to be speaking with you today, just to share, my life experience. I am thrilled, I'm humbled, I feel honored to have this incredible opportunity. My journey is an incredible journey which is still unfolding. It's not yet done, and many times Paul would say, I've not yet, I've not yet grasped what I'm, aiming to do. I keep pressing and marching forward. That's really my philosophy and my thoughts and my default setting. So born and raised in Zimbabwe, and my parents were deeply religious, if you want to say, people of faith. And so that also impacted me from a very early stage. And our family is like the Commonwealth, if I may say. so just a little bit, background. My dad was married, had 3 daughters and a son, and for some reason, he and his wife divorced. So my dad had, 4 kids from his first marriage. My dad remarried. He had 3 sons, and his wife passed away. So he took in those 3 sons together with the 4 children. My mom was married to my father's brother, or half-brother, if you want to call it that. And they had 2 daughters, and her husband died. So my mother was a widow. My father was a widower. But, it is my grandfather from my father's side who I understand suggested to my father and to my mother, because they were both, this was a daughter-in-law, this was his son, and both had lost their spouses, and, suggested the idea that why don't you guys to get married and look after your children. And they agreed, and my father went to pay all the formalities and dowries. And so my mother and my father came together as husband and wife. My mother brought her 2 daughters. My father brought his 7 children already. That's 9 children already, and we weren't born yet. So and this was in Gutu. That's where they come from, just like our last name. So after a couple of years, my father and my mother, they moved to Chegutu. My father went to his brother's place, where his brother had recently acquired a farm, and he invited his elder brother, who is my father, to come and help him and support him on the new farm. So they lived there. That's where, just before they left, my elder brother, who was the first child of this couple, was born. His name is John. And then I was born when they moved to Jerry Gutu. That's where I was born, my younger brother and a sister. And that sort of completed, the family unit. So from this new marriage came 4 people, added to the 9 already, and that's 13 people. That's quite some crowd. And so we're living together. The other 3 sisters from the first marriage got married there in Chekutu, so they were no longer there, but the rest of the clan was there. My dad then bought his own place, a farm which was like 20 kilometers away from his brother. And then we all moved there. In fact, that's where my youngest sister was born. So we grew up in this rural village, a farming community. And my mother and my father were very hardworking people and people of faith. And that's all we knew as growing up. We knew we had to work very hard. We knew that church was a regular thing. In fact, we had prayer every evening. And of course, on Wednesday and Friday evenings, we had, the preaching and the sermon. And sometimes we would meet with other families. So we would walk a distance of about, I would say, maybe 2 kilometers. And then we'd have service there. And then we would alternate, right? And then on Sundays, we would then go to the church where the other families would also come outside our cell. I would come and we would join there. So that's me growing up. If you want to think of the church as a house or as a bedroom, I grew up in the church, so to speak. I began primary there, and it was not far away. I would say maybe 1.5 kilometers from our homestead. In fact, we could hear the bell ringing, at the school from our home place. So where it was near. So I did primary there. The school is called Waze, and the large community is called Msengezi. This is under Chegutu district. That's where I grew up. That's where I went to primary. And, in primary, I would say to the 4th grade, I really didn't have an idea or a clue what this was all about. I thought it was just a conspiracy and a plan to get me out of the house, out of the comfort of my blankets, and just, So I initially I didn't like it, and it didn't come natural to me. And so sometimes I would hide and not go to school until the teachers would alert my mom. And one day she followed me, found me hiding, behind this bush. And you can imagine what happened to me.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah, because, our parents were disciplinarians. They broke no nonsense. So she took me to the teacher. And I was in the 2nd grade then. And of course, the teacher also gave me a hiding. And from that day, I never, tried to hide. I was always in class. But I struggled in those early years. It was only in the 4th grade. I don't really know whether it was the teacher and his approach or what. Somehow it just opened. To some extent, I probably matured and became aware of what school was all about. And that's when my grades improved, and I had, a thing going on in school. I was doing much better. I think was probably between number 3 and 4 and 5 in a class of about maybe 30-something students. So the teachers really, took a liking to me and would support me, would encourage me. The same thing with my mom. My mom was the cheerleader. She believed in me, my mom. Now I think of it. My dad was kind of aloof. My dad was in his 50s then, So, and my mom was in her 40s. So I think it's a generational gap thing. My dad was not somebody who would, show his emotions and his feelings like that. No, I barely remember my dad telling me that I love you. It was not done in when I was growing up. My mom probably would, in a conversation, referring to other people and speaking to other people, and so that's the kind of environment we grew up. But we knew our parents really loved us because they did the best to provide, to make a way. And in their sermons, they would really be talking about us, having faith in the Lord, working hard, trusting the Lord with everything else. The other thing I need to add was my dad really loved his relatives.
Right.
And so whenever, a relative would, maybe it's because he had lost his loved ones and so forth. So this probably impacted him. I'm just, thinking. And so when his brother-in-law, one of them, passed away, he went and took his sister and all of her children. And my sister had almost like 9 to 10 kids. So he brought them. Then my dad also went to his cousins. We don't use cousins if they are from your father. We actually use brother, and he took the kids. So in our family growing up, I can swear we were not less than 20 people.
Wow.
So it was a village,
Yeah.
and so even the meals, even the work, and everything else, we were quite a bunch. And there was no distinction to say, well, this is a cousin, this is a son. We were all treated the same and put the same kind of rigor in terms of the skills and the work and everything that was expected. So in a way that started to mold our personalities and characters, all of us, we were expected to work. My dad always spoke about the missed opportunity that he didn't go to school. It was a big regret in his life. He always said, if I could be young again, I would go to school. So to him, school was everything in that sense, but he would not force you to go to school if you decided you didn't want to go. But my mom would definitely force you, discipline you, and make sure he leaves you in the care of the head of the school and made sure you did your homework and everything else. So that's in a nutshell, growing up, those ethics and values of work, of school, were drilled in us. My dad always used to say, I wish my mother had not hid me in the granary when the teachers. I understand in those days, and my dad was born 1911, so you're talking about maybe 1915 or 1918. The teachers would go out in the village to look for the kids and bring them to school. The people were not so keen on sending their kids to school because it was a new thing. It was like, school for what? What would they do? So my dad didn't go, but my dad taught himself to read, and the only book he could read was the Shona Bible. That he could read for himself, but he couldn't write. Neither could he speak English. But my mom could read, could understand English a little bit, maybe 30% or so. My mom had gone to primary school and to Catholic school and had been taught about catechism and all the other stuff. So she was more learned, and she also understood the value of education. My father was a great provider, so my brother and I progressed beyond primary, and we enrolled for secondary education. My dad, we were never expelled from school for lack of fees. Never. My dad made sure that he paid. A very responsible person, and of course, I also took from that and always try to emulate, my dad, and make sure that, I don't let up on my responsibilities. So from get go, that's one of the things which was drilled in me. I finished primary, enrolled in secondary school. My elder brother was already at Dada Secondary School. This is in southern Zimbabwe, in Masvingo province. So I followed after him, and we went there. 4 good years of solid education. Dada was known as one of the, cream of the crop. It was school which had been set up by the former Prime Minister of Southern Rhodesia, called Garfield Todd, and he recruited the best of teachers and leaders. And our principal, Mr. Mkono Shuru, was very, he was a disciplinarian and very shrewd, and brooked also no nonsense. It was a school of, I would say, maybe 400 kids, and he ran it very well. Excellent in terms of the facilities, accommodation, the food, the faculty of teachers, the sports, the church, and everything. And that was another solidification of my faith. That is a Church of Christ school, missionary school, and the values also are very good, very strict, and very good. So we finished all that. In 1976, excelled very well, came out with a distinction, and then I had matured, and I really knew my interests. Well, at least had some understanding. In the then Rhodesia, which was still a colony, and this was prior to independence, the environment was very difficult for black people in terms of opportunities and jobs. And most people would just end up being a teacher or a policeman or a clerk. And I was like, I want to be a clerk. It was something to be really. We were aspiring to be clerks, but my headmaster in the primary school was like, no, you go to teaching. Unfortunately, at that stage, my father passed away. And then there was a lot of disruption which came along with it. My dad's friend stepped in as our guardian, his elder Shadrach Manyika. He stepped in, and he really helped us to go through the grieving process, to understand it, and to try and look for opportunities. He's the one who took me to Harare. I had gone to Harare only once as part of an excursion while we were in the 7th grade. I had not known Harare, but he took me there, took me to the British Council, and applied for scholarships and opportunities for me. Eventually, I think after a couple of months, an opportunity then arose. But prior to that, I then enrolled in Harare, staying with my cousin to do, what they call the secretarial course, and it was typing, bookkeeping, office practice, and some other skills. So this is where, it kind of whet my appetite, because I got to the city, and, my village mentality was being transformed. When you come from the village, it's a different ballgame. That's all I knew. So I'm coming into the city and being in that space. The good thing also, my cousin Benjamin Nyadzo, you know him, was a very strong believer and also took me in. And so, by the way, we were raised together with my father, and Benjamin's dad had passed away, and that's the, my father's sister's children, whom I was referring to. So we grew up together, so when I'd finished my O-level, he said, no, Sekuru, come here, you can go to school and live with me. So we lived together while I was doing this secretariat thing. I was diligent in my learning, because then I knew the kind of challenges which we were facing. I forgot to tell you that those other years, my dad married again, a second wife. So it was my mom, and then, Amainini. And this Amainini was a niece to my father's second wife who had passed away. And so they had one child. But after a while, my dad wasn't satisfied. just packed my mining things and her child and took them back to her father and said, I'm done with this. Look after my son. I will be supporting you. So my father and my mom, stayed together. Uh, as children, sometimes stuff happens to your parents, but you really don't know why. You know, but now growing up, I kind of think my father was under some pressure from his brother-in-law who wanted to give him, what they call chimutsamapiwa, or something like a substitute wife. And my father, I think, reluctantly took in, but afterwards, I think he received a lot of counseling from the church and even from his sisters who said, no, that is wrong. Why are you doing that? You already have a wife. So he sent her away. So when he passed, my brothers, step-brothers, if you want to call them in English, were not happy with our father's death, and typical of any African community, there's always blame that, oh, there's a witch and all that. So we were sent packing, my mother and my brothers and my sister were sent packing away from everyone because they said my mom had caused my dad's death. And so her brother, my uncle, took us in, and that's in Gokwe. And that's currently what we call home now. That's how we moved. That was in 1977. Right? And then that's when my father's friend took me to Harare, applied for a scholarship, and looked for a place for me to do bookkeeping. And then I moved in with my cousin, Benjamin. We stayed together. I finished my course. This was a year-long course. That's when I got an appetite for bookkeeping. And even though I'm a very good typist, even up to today, and I'm thankful for that skill, I got it from there. I gravitated towards, bookkeeping or later on accounting. That's when I was introduced to that world, and I saw that this is a great skill. This is what I really want to do, and I got a job as a school bursar, essentially the school clerk who does all the typing of the test and receives all the money, does the banking, supports the head of the school in the administration of all the resources, the budget is given by the ministry and everything else. But we still remember in Rhodesia, and things were very difficult in terms of opportunities and moving up the ladder, if you want to call it that. The scholarship then came up while I was working as a clerk, and this was a scholarship to do A-levels in England. And, I'd just barely, I was still a teenager, actually. I was 19 years old. So I got this opportunity, and boom, I left for England. I was so thrilled and excited and happy, like, ooh, England, here I come.
Yeah.
So just to say that, the Lord always had me in terms of just opening the doors and opportunities at the right time, and having mentors and people over me who were guiding me all the way. So I went to England to do my A-levels, and I did that in accounting, economics, and all the commercial subjects. And there, of course, I met some young people, and we were together, doing stuff and so forth. And with the freedom, you also sometimes get carried away, because I was now into disco dancing, into everything, and going to the club and having a good time.
Wow.
Thankfully, I never drank, never smoked. That didn't catch on with me. But I really love to go dancing and, the new songs and what have you, and with the others. In fact, I was more like the chaperone for all the young people, because they would drink themselves silly. I would almost carry them on my back at 2 a.m. coming from the disco, going back to our apartment. So in that sense, I was responsible. But in my faith, I was getting carried away. Then at school, I did very well. My teachers really liked me and kept encouraging me. Then came 1980. I was in my second year and then Zimbabwe or Rhodesia became independent. And then the government stepped in to manage the relationship with the British Council. So they said, okay, what we are going to do is for those who want to proceed to do their degrees, we are only sponsoring the natural sciences. We are not sponsoring social studies and arts and anything else. And I was in the social studies stream. So they said, everybody, you come back to Zimbabwe and you go to the University of Zimbabwe. If you don't like it, it's your own problem. Okay, so back I came. That was 1981 now. And then I went to the University of Zimbabwe. Obviously, by that time, I really knew what I wanted. Wanted to be an accountant. I wanted to study accounting. I'd whet my appetite in the advanced level, which had started as bookkeeping back home. So I had solidified in terms of what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go. So when I came back home, of course, disappointed. Who would want to leave England when you are just, a 20-year-old? You are excited, you are happy, you are like, I want to live here. But somehow, by God's grace, I said, no, I am going home. So it was two of us and one of my friends, Yona Banda. We're still very good friends even to today, and our families relate. So, we came back home and went to the University of Zimbabwe. I did my Bachelor of Accountancy. Again, I did well. I mean, I could have done better. I wish I'd got a distinction or first, but I didn't get that. But all the same, I got an honors. So it was also just the early years of independence. It was very hard to get a place for chartered accountancy, and that was the top. If you are an accountant, you ought to be a chartered accountant. That was the top of the cream. I didn't get in. There were only 5 firms, and so the spaces depended on who you knew. And I know someone who knew someone who didn't have an honors. He just had a third class pass. He got in and became a chartered accountant. I couldn't get. I didn't know anyone. My folks are villagers. Who knows about any chartered accountants? Who has any connection with anything? No one. So the opportunities which came where either you could go to the tax department in the Ministry of Finance, or you could go to the National Audit Office. So I considered and consulted and got the advice that National Audit Office, your skills and your opportunities are broader. If you choose tax, it's very narrow, very limited. You can do well there, but if you don't like it, then you don't have much options. But if you do audit, you can do accounting, you can do budgeting, you can do auditing, you can do a lot of other things. So I joined the National Audit Office soon after graduation. I worked there and was rapidly promoted, did very well. After 3.5 years, the Ministry of Finance was beginning a new department called Accountant General's Department. And I think a couple of us, probably 4 to 5 people, were selected to go and join that office as almost like seed human capital. So that's when I joined the Ministry of Finance. But I'd done very well as an auditor and led teams to audit. And we were auditing very exciting places like prisons. Would go and count prisoners. We would go go to the police camp and count the bullets and the arms and everything else and look at the records. And I really, enjoyed all that. And we got opportunities also to go and for training abroad. I remember going to Germany at some point and being trained in how to audit construction work and all the other things. So, after 3.5 years, I was a senior auditor then. I then left to join the Ministry of Finance. I was promoted to the post of Assistant Chief Accountant, then started work. That's how I then moved to the Ministry of Finance. And we had a brilliant Accountant General then called Michael Ndudzo. Oh, the guy was just an inspiration. he would just inspire you so much that you didn't even bother to look at, oh, so what time am I going home? No, you would just feel like he valued people. And he was very clear in terms of the assignments he gave you and the feedback and everything else. And that really helped me. And I became quite confident in what I was, what I was doing. And the thing with the civil service then was that whites were leaving, so many black people were being promoted quickly. So there was a lot of turnover, which was positive in some way, but sometimes it just pulled you into places where you weren't ready. So the accountant general was promoted. He became a chief executive officer of one of the big industries in Zimbabwe. So we were left with an acting, accountant general was an old white guy, and he was there for a couple of years, and I was rapidly promoted to chief accountant, then to the deputy accountant general quickly, and we were involved in many other exercises, which were some of them probably I wasn't ready, but you had to just perform. And we were engaged now with the multilateral discussions. That is the World Bank, the IMF, the donors, the Japanese, and what have you. So you had to move quickly, think on your feet, and also get to do a lot of stuff quickly. So then after a couple of years, they retired the acting accountant general. I was appointed acting accountant general very early. And quite a challenging position. In fact, one of the guys who came, I was 31 years old, and he came and said, "You are the accountant general? So young? What's so important about you? Are you a genius or something?"
I would say that was incredible. I'm telling you, at 31,
Yeah.
wow, that's amazing.
And this is head of department, and this is the head of the accounting service in the entire country. And you're responsible for the profession, and for the rules, and for the accounting of they call it public finance, which means the entire budget of the government, to put all the reports together, and for the auditor general to audit. And then you go and support the minister when he tables that report in parliament and defend all the issues and all the observations of the auditor general. You had to come up with solutions and then work with the ministries, of course, who were also part of that report. And a lot of them had serious issues. So I was in an acting position for 5 years.
Wow.
And I was beginning to wonder, are these guys, if they don't want me, why don't they just send somebody?
Exactly.
I can't act this long. It's just it becomes a demoralizing factor. I mean, in the first 2 years, you're excited, but thereafter, you're like, why can't they confirm me? What's going on? So I had those things bearing on my mind and so forth. So eventually, they called me for an interview, and then it was just a talk, and then they asked me, "So how do you feel?" I said, "I feel like an abused wife," and they laughed and said, "Why?" I said, when a wife is good and she prepares all the meals, she does all the laundry, looks after the kids, and if you're not careful as a husband, you take her for granted. It's almost as if, so what? And you don't appreciate it, you don't value it. And I said, that's the way I feel. I mean, in all these years, I have produced all these reports, supported my minister, go to parliament, have this thing tabled, and have parliament approve the budgets and all the financial reports and everything else. And now I come here and you ask me, well, so can you do the job? I've already done the job in 5 years. So I feel taken for granted. At that moment, I absolutely didn't care. I said, if they give it to me, they give it. If they don't, I don't care. I've done it. So they then laughed, and in a few days, they confirmed me as accountant general. I was probably about 34, 35 then. So again, I had favor because all my bosses, so I reported to the permanent secretary. In other countries, they call them director general and so forth. So I reported to that, and we had many permanent secretaries who came and went. And then with all of them, I worked with them very well. They really liked me. They took me as part of their management. So that's where some of the training came. At the beginning of the week, every Monday, we would meet with the minister. So it would be the permanent secretary and the 5 heads of department. We would meet, look at the entire issues facing the ministry, whether from the budget, from the economic side, from the financial reporting, which was what I was doing, or from the administration, or anything else. We'll take a look at that. And that opened my perception, my understanding of the economy and of public finances, of how to run, a ministry, a department in the government. So I got a lot of training, and I had very good permanent secretaries and very good ministers. In fact, when I joined, there was Minister Chidzero, and very nice guy, very humble person, if I might say, and a gentleman, encouraging. Dr. Chidzero had worked for the United Nations for years. So he was a very true professional, and he knew how to relate. He had people skills and everything else. So he's the one who led the delegations when we went to the World Bank and to the IMF, and I was part of that team. Another excellent opportunity for training and for just general appreciation and understanding what goes on in managing the finances of the government. So I remained with the Minister of Finance for a couple of years. I think 5 more years as Accountant General. I tried my best to introduce. My thrust was really about modernization. In fact, when I was chief accountant, I was the first one to approach the donors and said, we want a desktop. It was during those days, these computers were not so. We used to use these typewriters, which were long and big, and the people would send it there. So I discussed with the donors. We got our first computer for one of our departments, and that department produced the financial statements quickly, on time, audited, and we had the report, which was a smasher, And so when I became Accountant General, then insisted on computerization of our department. We got more equipment, and so the work became lighter, enjoyable for the team. My team had in the core, we had 100 people. 50 people were dealing with the internal financial reporting, the bookkeeping and the rules and of managing assets and all that. The other 50 people they were in a consultancy outfit where we would send them to the ministries and send them to the local authorities where there were challenges. They would go and help them to rebuild so that was my core units. But I also had other units which were attached to me. And this included what was called the Central Payments Office. This was the payment center for all the government checks, and also the tender board. And this is the Central Procurement Board for all the purchases of the government. So those fell under me. So it was quite a wide portfolio, a challenging portfolio, because there were issues always. With the Central Payments Office, there were challenges of thefts by the staff. And also collusion with the government providers, so they would collude, and some of the amounts would be inflated and all that. So it was dealing with all those things. With the tender board, that's a hot potato, where all these procurement deals by the government are always very challenging with all kinds of interested parties. So you get a lot of pressure, from all sides. But thankfully, I thank God I never stole a dime. So integrity for me was a chief thing. Always faithfulness, a value and an ethic which I'd gotten even when I was young, even from my parents, that you've got to be a trustworthy person. So during my tenure, of course, we had other cases of thefts here and there, but we would investigate them to the best of our ability and prosecute, the culprits. So that was what was happening. But during those years, coming and going, I became, a presenter to many workshops, to members of parliament, to our colleagues in the region and so forth. And we decided to form, a loose organization with our ministries of finance in the region, 12 countries. We came together, were sponsored by the Swedes, and we came up with an organization. And so I would be presenting there. We would invite also other key people to present. So we invited in 2001, we did invite the International Federation of Accountancy. This is the body which is responsible for international auditing standards, international accounting standards for the public sector, and international standards for ethics, and all those other things. So we invited them because we were looking at international accounting standards for the public sector. And I made my presentation, and one of the guests, we were just talking after dinner and so on. And he said, "Oh, you're very good at what you do, and you know this thing very well, presented very well. We have positions coming up in New York. Are you interested?" I said, "Yeah, I'll consider." He said, "Oh, here's my website. Please go there. When you see it, apply. We'll interview you. If you find you suitable, we'll take you." And so I came and I spoke with my wife. I didn't tell you the story of getting married and all that, but anyway, some other day.
Yeah.
So, I told my wife, and this was now in 2001. I told my wife, when I went to Malawi, I made my presentation. I met this guy, Paul Sutcliffe, and I presented. He said, "Oh, you do an excellent job. We've got a job in New York if you want it, And my wife said, "And what did you say?" I said, "I'll consider." He said, "What? Consider? We are going to New York." I said, "We are going?" She says, "Yeah, we are going."
I thought as much.
You know why? Because I'd become so comfortable. This head of department at that time was a huge and big deal. So I was like, I go to New York and be run by small boys and small girls to do what? I mean, I had 3 secretaries, I had 3 conference rooms, I had cars in the carpool. You could just pick up any car, and I would go to my village and come back and do what and this and that. So I was like, nah, I don't want to be. But my wife said, no, we are leaving. We are going to New York. So I applied for the job. They invited me to London. We had the interview. The interview was just a conversation, really, nothing difficult. Again, stressing the favor of God and the grace of God. So and then they said, we will give you the job. I was like, what? Really? They said, when do you want to start? I said, oh, by the way, I got to give notice. So I said I have to give 1 month notice. So they said, oh, you go ahead and do that. So I gave notice October 2021. I came and, I resigned. My boss was like, where are you going? Why are you going? Where are you going? I didn't tell him, of course. I didn't want him to spoil I left the government of Zimbabwe end of October 2001. This was after a career of almost like close to 20 years, about 18 years. Very seasoned. I went through a lot. I was grounded. I was toughened. We'll get an occasion to speak about some of the incidents and occasions where it was it was a hard hit area. It was very difficult, very challenging, but it toughened me. That's what I took away from that. And I joined the International Federation of Accounting specifically to now develop standards for the public sector accounting, not for all the governments and international organizations. Very exciting work based in New York. And of course, this is a new environment, but because I'd lived in England before, at least I could relate. And also we used to visit the US when we went to the World Bank, which is based, and the IMF based in Washington, D.C. So I was familiar, with the US. And after a month, my employers told me to get the visas and get my family over. So I brought my wife and our 4 kids. Our youngest was 3 years old then. Our eldest, I think, was about 15. So I was there for 3 years. I really enjoyed it. And again, God just blessed me. I have traveled. I traveled to the point where I just didn't like traveling. People may think this is funny. I mean, we went to China, we went to Germany, Japan, Mauritius, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Buenos Aires, there in Argentina. And it was like, wow, and it's favor. That's what I can say. Favor and God's grace upon me. I did my work very well. My bosses really liked me. But somehow, I don't know, God just speaks. I got so disenchanted. I don't know why.
Mm.
Maybe it was homesickness or something. And I thought, nah, I want to go back to Zimbabwe and maybe do some stuff of my own, maybe consultancy, maybe stuff like that. I got an invitation from that organization of the Accountants General, which we had formed when I was an accountant. They said, listen, we've been rotating the secretariat towards moving with the chairmanship, but now we want to establish a permanent office in South Africa and Pretoria. Would you be interested in being the chief executive officer of that outfit? And it resonated very well with my spirit. I consulted with my boss then, who said, yeah, this is a great opportunity for you, Jerry, to grow, so go for it if you want. And so I confirmed with those and then resigned and left for South Africa again with my family. I've always been a firm believer of holding my family very tight and close to me, like almost very jealous that no, I can't leave my kids to be raised by somebody else because I don't know the values that they will instill in them. So I dragged my kids because they were also so happy to be in this space and we're not so sure about the South African environment. Especially the youngest at that time was like, no, I'm not going back to Africa. I understand people live in trees. And I'm like, we're going back home with you. Did you ever sleep in a tree? No, I'm not going. So, of course, at 6 years old, you just force them whether they like it or not. So we came, but after 2 weeks, my youngest son was almost like speaking Afrikaans and really liked and forgot about America. And his accent even changed to the South African one, where they don't say building, they say building. This building. And I'm like, what's building now? So we were in South Africa, and of course, all along I was also serving in the church. And my pastor, Pastor Dennis Erasmus, whom I had come to know while I was in Zimbabwe, we went to his church and we spoke, and he was like, what about Bible college? And so I enrolled for my seminary training while I was there, and now I was mature, very focused. I knew what I wanted. So, that training was also quite good for me. After 2.5 years, again, I was like, I don't know about South Africa. South Africa turned out to be a limited place. Unlike here in the US, there were many opportunities for my kids and my wife to work in South Africa. It was not allowed. And the opportunities were very challenging. So, after a while, and there were also incidents. We were burgled. People came, they stole a lot of stuff and money and what have you. And we felt our lives were threatened. And so we started thinking, maybe we need to go back to the US. We had filed for green cards before we left. So the green cards came, and then we pulled out of South Africa and came back here. When we came back here, that's when I looked for an opportunity at the United Nations, and that's how I joined the United Nations. Because when I was working for the International Federation of Accountants, the United Nations was one of our potential clients who would adopt the International Public Sector Accounting Standards, because they were adopting their own internal standards, and that's not so credible if you are the one who writes the rules and then you apply them. It's like the referee player kind of thing. You can't be both. You've got to be either. So we were doing our marketing thing and persuading them to adopt the standards which we're developing. That is while I was with the International Federation of Accountants. But they were a bit reluctant on some areas and were trying to negotiate. By the time I came back from South Africa, they'd adopted those standards. And so they were looking for people who were very familiar with those standards. And I was very familiar because that was what I was training people in South Africa. So they took me on board, and that's how I joined, the United Nations. And I worked with the United Nations for close to 20 years, almost 18. And also there is so much travel as well, and so much opportunity of growth and of applying one skill as a public sector accountant and financial management expert, if I may say that. Just looking at this, so in a nutshell, when you reach 65 at the UN, you got to retire, right? So I hit 65 January 2025. I retired. All along, ever since I was a teenager, I've been serving in the church in one capacity or the other. So we had also started. Initially, we joined a local church, and we were there for 10 years with our pastor. We even visited Zimbabwe with our pastor. But I told him, listen, God is calling me. I also want to launch ministry at some point. I'll let you know when. So I went to South Africa. I did my training, finished my training. I came back and worked with my pastor for 3 years. Then my pastor in South Africa called me and said, now it's time for us to ordain you in conjunction with your pastor. So I was ordained in 2009. And, I worked with my pastor here for 3 more years. In the meantime, I told him, listen, I feel God is calling me. I need to launch ministry. He was like, no, I'm leaving this ministry to you because I'm retiring. I said, no, that's not what God is telling me. So eventually he agreed because I said, I don't want to leave without your blessing. I don't want to live like I've been chased away or I'm angry at something. I'm not. Very happy you still remain one of my mentors, but I want your blessing and also Pastor Erasmus Dennis' blessing. So we launched in 2012. We launched the Apostolic Faith Mission Jubilee Celebration Center in New Jersey. And we were operating as a branch of AFM of South Africa under Pastor Erasmus at the Corpus Christi, which is AFM Midrand. We did that for a couple of years from 2012 to 2020. And he said, Jerry, no, we got to win you off. You got to be independent. You got to do your own thing. And then you report to AFM International, where all the national churches report to. And so from 2020, we're then reporting to AFM International as an ordained pastor. So we began the work, my wife and I and my family. I spoke at our old church when pastor said, this is your opportunity. What do you want to say to the church? I said, listen, we're not dividing the church. I'm not going to be stealing anybody's sheep. I do not want any of you to follow me. If you want to follow me, talk to pastor. If he clears you and he's happy, you can join, but not before. If you're visiting me, make sure the pastor knows and you have clearance from him. And pastor was very happy. So I left. 2 people asked for pastor to join us, and they joined us. And with my family had increased. Then some of our nieces had joined us. I think we were 8, and then 2 people. So that's 10 people, and we started the work of ministry. AFM Jubilee Celebration Center, and based in New Jersey. And now we are at a stage where we have formed a national church, not just a New Jersey church, by coming together with others and also launching other churches. It's grace, or if you want to say favor, and faith. I think that's the running code throughout. Very fortunate to have been introduced to the faith by my parents. My father was a deacon, even though when he married his second wife, they told him he should stand down. My mom continued to be deaconess, but after my father, returned the second wife, he was reinstated. So he was a deacon, a brilliant teacher for somebody who wasn't formally educated, but very wise, very knowledgeable about the Word of God. My mother was a prayer warrior and a woman of faith. So for me, that's the thread which I got from them. When I review the history, they started with nothing, but they ended up sending any of my siblings who wanted to go to school without any struggle, looked after all the nephews and cousins and what have you. As I said, we were quite a big compound by ourselves, a commonwealth, in fact. So that's the thread which I see running through, and God just opening doors at every turn, and even giving me opportunities which I even feel to today that I really don't deserve. I mean, being head of department at that age was a big deal. And on many occasions, I was left as the acting director general or permanent secretary, and I would be called by the president And of course, the minister, I was always in the minister's office. And when new ministers were appointed, I was even appointed to be the person who will do the induction, introduce them to what is public sector financial management. How does the government operate in terms of its budgeting, in terms of budget execution, financial reporting, auditing, reporting back to Parliament, the entire accountability circle. So I did that, and a lot of new ministers were so appreciative. They're like, you know your stuff, and very impressed. An excellent opportunity, which even up to now, I look back and think, wow, I was that? It was like I'm thinking it was somebody else. I was that. I don't know. I was maybe naive to some extent. To me, it was like, so what? I'm doing it, But I look back, it is an enormous and a tremendous responsibility. And I'm so glad I contributed, particularly to the modernization, bringing everybody from doing these things manually. We had this huge ledger, which was called the public debt. It was a thick book like this, but we computerized all that. And we were able to make our payments and produce the reports and all that. So if there's anything which I left, it was really the legacy of modernization and ensuring that, we remained accountable and timely and everything. So it was an incredible opportunity, and I had favor, and it was an opportunity for leadership training for me during that particular time. And I'm so grateful to everyone who I worked with, whether it's Mr. Ndudzo, Mr. Morrison, Mr. Kuwaza, and the Minister Chidzero, and then came other ministers in between. And then for some time we had Minister Morerwa, and then we had Minister Makoni, Simparashi Makoni. That's when I left. So I worked with some incredible people who taught me, not just the formal skill, but to be adept, to be adaptable, to be nimble, to be shrewd, without being arrogant, but to be quite firm and to be ethical. Those things were drilled in me, and to shun corruption. Those things were really drilled, in me during that tenure. I would say tenacity. Just sticking with something and doing it. You're given responsibility. You don't do half jobs, half-heartedly. No. I made sure that I delivered on the responsibilities which were, given to me. And one of the things was to be fearless. These positions, you get called by the president and he says, come to the State House right now. And you're in the middle of the city during lunch. You don't have the faintest idea. Why is he calling me for what? You don't have a brief. And that happened to me a couple of times. What I look at now, looking back, is I was never afraid. I never shivered and say, oh, no, no, I was there. And we would sit the same desk. I sit on the other side. I'm sitting here and my minister is over there, and another minister who has brought an issue is sitting there. So I get there, I get to realize, okay, so it's this ministry and the issues. As I said, every Monday would sit with the minister and the heads of department and the permanent secretary. Every Friday would sit with the permanent secretary and then go through all the heads of department and go through all the technical issues. So at any point, five of us had an idea or were briefed about the issues. So when I was called, I wasn't hesitant or fearful or anything. No, I would just say, thank you, Your Excellency. The situation is like this and this and this, even to the point of even arguing. Not in a rude way, but asking. At some point, the president told me, well, you guys just pay some of these unexpected expenditures, and so why are you refusing to give this ministry? I said, such as what, Your Excellency? And now I think back, I was like, it's like he wasn't offended. He says, oh, you borrow loans at 3%, they increase to 5%, and then you have to pay the difference. Why are you paying that if you're saying you need the backing of the law? And I said, oh, there's a law, Your Excellency, you are allowed by the law. Constitutional and statutory appropriation allows us to do that. He said, okay, all right, but still, but it's that courage where I didn't shiver and say, oh, okay, we're going to do, no. I was so relaxed. I was so like, I look back now and I said, I was like somebody, I don't know. But that's the Holy Spirit. He gives you courage and he gives you what to say. That's what I can say in that moment. Also, what stuck with me is a great work ethic. I work hard and I check up on people. I clarify. I do my best. If I'm not sure, I go back to to consult. The next thing I can talk about is integrity. As I said before, this has been drilled in me from an early age. You do not steal. You do not take anybody's stuff. My father was very clear about that. He said, I do not owe anybody a dime. And I only owe God my life, and I don't want to owe any human being anything. The same thing with my mom. So that's the same thing which I still carry. I want to be a person of integrity, not compromised by corruptions and bribes and all kind of things. And I was in a bribe-prone situation, but I never, acquiesced to that. If anybody can come out and say, I gave him $20 to fast track this, well, I don't have anything of that. So, and then of course, respect. Respecting people you work with, especially your juniors, treat them as fellow human beings. Respect is something which is reciprocated. You can't demand and then expect the others to comply. You respect them, they respect you. Also taught about humility, and of course, this is from our faith. This is the bread and butter. So I've gone back to school now. I'm doing my doctorate in leadership. I've always been fascinated with leadership. So I'm doing that with Oral Roberts University. In fact, I'm in my third and final year and excited. Of course, it's a lot of work, but I thank the Lord. So I'm a person who always loves to keep sharpening the saw. What you know is not all that there is to know. There is much more out there. So I continue sharpening the saw. I continue learning from others and improving my skills. One of the things which I don't do fairly well now as I used to is reading. I love reading biographies of people, leadership topics, and anything interesting. I love to do that. And of course, my professional development, lots of things are happening in the accounting fraternity. So I try and keep up, but now I am falling behind because of school and because of work and everything else. Also, the importance of networking. You don't know it all. You need others of like mind and others of not so like mind to keep refreshing yourself, extending yourself, and broadening yourself. And this, by the way, also extends to other people of other faiths. I think sometimes we are too restrictive. It's not that I believe in their faith, but I see the good things that they have. And I see their commitment and try and learn from there. I never move away from Christ. Christ is the center of it all. But there are great ethics from other religions and commitment, which is astounding, which we need to learn from. So having that broader perspective on issues is one of those things which I've learned from networking. And of course, the importance of family, faith, and community. I believe in family. I've seen the havoc it caused us in my, I don't know whether you want to call it four-quad family, where we are in different buckets, from our mother's side. And I see the challenges of pulling us together. I must say my brothers and I have been trying to be the main connector between all these various families and pulling everybody and working and say, listen, we are one family and we support anyone, nephew, cousin from any side because we are one family. So family to me is very important. The same thing with my own nuclear family. My wife is my friend, my encourager. I also encourage her to do what she wants to do, to excel, I never feel threatened, even though when I was head of department, she was a secretary in one of the parastatals. She was earning much more than me, because the government doesn't pay that much. But in terms of benefits, of course, I had these cars, carpool, and I could travel to go to wherever, and, whatever benefits from there and all that, and of course, I encourage my kids to be who they want to be. My daughter, we have 3 sons and 1 daughter and 2 grandkids now. My daughter had said she wanted to be a doctor, and I was so excited and happy. But she went home, spoke with one of my brother's cousins who said, "No, doctor, be an accountant like your dad." And lo and behold, she comes back and says, "I want to be an accountant." I said, "Mind your own business, please. You said you wanted to be a doctor." And of course, she's an accountant, and she has done an MBA. She has done a professional studies as a certified internal auditor and so forth. And my children too, I push them. My eldest son is now doing his MBA. He had, when you get married and have raising kids, he stopped for a while, but I'm pushing him. Second son has done well. He's actually now finished his CPA after an MBA and all that. So doing very well. My youngest is with the military, so we are also pushing that he continues with his studies. I'm also a firm believer in community. I went back to the primary school where I went. I'm working with them, supporting them as much as I can from my own personal resources. 2008 was the peak of the tragedy when the school had no chalk, no books, nothing. So, from my own personal coffers, my wife and I, we contributed, and we are helping even now. We're rehabilitating the houses there, the teachers, and now we are in a partnership with other former students who are sending some of the students to university. One of our students is with Midland State University, is going into his 3rd year now, doing computer science and doing brilliantly. So that's giving back. I also support the ECD, early learning, early child development at my primary school, but I also support, now that we moved, we are now in Gokwe, I support the ECD, which is in our village. I am a big supporter, bring them supplies, help them to fence off the school, to finish the construction and everything else. So I'm a firm believer in that, especially in education from an early age, making sure that, everybody's given a chance, like I was given by the Lord and by, those who support your dream, those who help you along the way. So I can't say in a nutshell, because that's not a nutshell. That's an overview. And of course, at an opportune time, we can always delve and move into other areas. But that's what I want to say about, the intro, the first chapter, if you want to call it that. If you have any follow-up questions and you want me to answer briefly there, I will. And also, as I said, we'll then be moving into the other areas in different sessions. But I really thank you and appreciate you for this opportunity to share. This is just meant to inspire the young people to know that if God could do it for me, a simple, plain villager who couldn't count to 10, couldn't speak a single syllable in English, He can do it for most of our kids now who are in a privileged position, right? But sometimes they suffer from a lack of confidence and things like that. So that's really, meant to inspire, and also just to give thanks and gratitude and honor to the Lord who is underwriting, my life, basically, and, providing the opportunities, providing everything which I need. It hasn't been the easiest course of life, but I look back and I even look at my peers and I see I have done so well. And I want to thank you, sir, for availing me this opportunity just to speak, to share. So over and back to you.
Wow. Thank you so much. This has been, one of the greatest stories that I've listened to. And I know I had said I don't want to introduce you because I didn't want to shortchange the audience and the listeners. So that's why I left it to you to kind of paint the full picture and the full story. I think my key takeaway, really, I think you started your journey with faith, and we moved through, the family side of things, the values, the focus that you had, and you kind of ended it with faith as well. So I like how you packaged, your whole story to say it's still a journey, and it's ongoing. And I think in our next episode, I would really want us to get into the different chapters of your life. I know you've got loads and loads of stories to share. I like what you talked about, being called by the president and, just randomly then going to meet up and so forth. I think I want more of those stories in our next episode so that we just share with our audience. They see that, it's possible to do whatever you want to do. And this is how you can navigate. I mean, all the way from the rural areas to the UK, to back to South Africa, and now with the USA. I mean, this is an incredible story. And now you're also the president of the AFM as well with the US. So this is an amazing story, but thank you so much for this first episode. I'm really looking forward to the next chapter so that we hear more and more exciting and insightful stories. Thank you so much for the day.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity. God bless you.
Meaningful careers now. Take the time to take your destiny in your hands now. With meaningful careers.